You are doing something right now that would have been considered deeply weird just 500 years ago. You're probably going to eat with a metal stick later, or a tiny shovel, and nobody thinks twice about it. But for most of human history, for hundreds of thousands of years, we ate with our hands. Every single person, royalty, peasants, warriors, priests. So what happened? Why did we suddenly decide our fingers weren't good enough? The answer isn't about hygiene. It's not really about manners either. It's about power and one very strange dinner party. Most people assume hand eating is primitive, but that framing gets the history backwards. Humans evolved eating with their hands for around 300,000 years. Your fingers are actually precise instruments. They sense temperature, texture, and pressure far better than any utensil. Research from India's National Institute of Nutrition found that touching food before eating triggers digestive enzymes. Your body starts preparing before the food even hits your mouth. In ancient Rome, Greece, Egypt, and across Asia and Africa, fingers were the tool, even at elite banquets. The Romans had a saying, manus manum lavat, one hand washes the other. It was considered good manners to keep your left hand clean for the table. Many cultures never stopped. India, Ethiopia, much of the Middle East and West Africa. Hand eating is still standard, still respected, and still delicious. This isn't a failure to evolve. It's a different choice. But if hand eating worked so well for so long, why did Europe suddenly abandon it? The answer comes down to one man, one fork, and a lot of peer pressure. We assume utensils spread because they were obviously better, but that's not how it happened at all. The fork existed in ancient Greece and Byzantium, but only as a kitchen tool for cooking, not eating. When a Byzantine princess named Theodora brought a golden fork to Venice around 1004 AD as part of her wedding trousseau, the church was horrified. A monk wrote that God gave us fingers to eat with. Using a metal tool was seen as arrogant, an insult to nature. She died shortly after a plague. Some clergy called it divine punishment for the fork. For the next 400 years, forks stayed rare, weird, foreign. Slowly, Italian nobles started adopting them, partly for practicality with pasta, partly as a status symbol. If you had a personal fork, you were rich enough to own one and clean enough to use one. By the 1500s, Catherine de' Medici carried her fork from Italy to France when she married the French king. The French court noticed. The trend spread upward through the aristocracy. So the fork spread from the top of society down. But that still doesn't explain why ordinary people gave up their hands. For that, we need to talk about something far more powerful than a fork. This is the part of the story most people have never heard, and it reframes everything. In 1530, a Dutch scholar named Erasmus published a small book called On Good Manners for Boys. It told children how to sit, eat, blow their nose, and behave at a table. It became a massive bestseller, one of the most read books in Europe for 2 centuries. But here's what's fascinating. Erasmus wasn't just writing etiquette. He was drawing a line between the civilized and the uncivilized, between the educated class and the lower class, between people who used utensils and people who didn't. Sociologist Norbert Elias spent decades studying this, and his conclusion, table manners spread as a form of social control. The ruling class kept changing the rules. New forks, new spoons, new knives, new positions, just fast enough that the lower classes couldn't keep up. Eating correctly became proof that you belong. We still do this. The anxiety around which fork to use at a formal dinner, that's not about cleanliness. It's about signaling. It's a test. It was always a test. So manners were partly about power. But somewhere along the way, there was one more shift, and it happened during a very specific, very bloody period of history. The shape of your silverware drawer today was decided by a cardinal's anxiety about assassination. Before the 1600s, people ate with a personal knife, the same knife they used for everything else. Work, defense, eating. You brought your knife to dinner. You pointed it at people while talking. You used the tip to pick meat. In 1669, King Louis XIV of France issued a royal decree banning pointed knives at the table and on the street. His chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu, had reportedly been so disgusted watching guests pick their teeth with knife tips that he had all the pointed knives in his house ground down. The flat-tipped dinner knife was born, and it spread across Europe as a mark of refinement. Now people needed a separate tool to spear food. Enter the fork. One political decree reshaped every table in the Western world. The fork didn't win because it was better. It won because a king banned its competition. We went from hands to knives to forks, all driven by power, status, and one very opinionated cardinal. But the story isn't over, because right now the rules are changing again. In the last decade, high-end restaurants have started serving food meant to be eaten by hand, on purpose. Michelin-starred chefs plate food on boards, in parchment or in shells. The message is deliberate. Hands mean intimacy. Hands mean authenticity. Hands mean you trust the food and the moment. Street food culture has exploded globally. Tacos, dumplings, shawarma, fried chicken, all hand foods, all prestige foods now. At the same time, billions of people across South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East never accepted the fork as default. They kept their own food cultures intact, and increasingly, the West is catching up to what they knew all along. The right way to eat was never about health or logic. It was always about who had the power to set the rules. And right now, those rules are loosening. Here's what's wild to sit with. The fork felt disgusting before it felt civilized. The knife felt normal before it felt dangerous. And eating with your hands felt human before it felt rude. None of this was inevitable. It was invented by people who wanted to sort themselves above other people. So next time someone makes you feel bad for picking up food with your fingers, remember you're not being primitive. You're being 300,000 years of human.